Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Saturday, May 23rd, 2026. And I'd mentioned in my last vlog under Thoughts and Reflections, episode 18, there's an obvious divide between the creative arts and what I call the destructive arts. So the creative arts refer to any human activities that are dedicated to the use of imagination and skill and ingenuity aimed at producing aesthetic, expressive, symbolic, communicative, and even healing outcomes, essentially that which is life-affirming or intended to spread joy and happiness. Basically, any human efforts that are devoted to creating cultural forms of expression that inspire, that uplift, or otherwise enhance human life and or our broader environments or ecosystems. At the opposite end of the continuum, we have the destructive arts, which refer to any human activities or disciplines that are dedicated to the use of human ingenuity and creativity, but with the aim of destroying or immiserating people, their cultures, and the biosphere more generally. So simply put, destructiveness is the quality, capacity, or tendency of a person, behavior, or general force to cause profound damage, harm, or absolute ruin. The issue with which I'm concerned is why we, that is, humans in general, why don't we exercise our creative capacities more often, or the majority of the time, if not always? Stated another way, how much of our lives are individually or collectively devoted to the destructive arts? And so here I want to reference Erich Fromm's classic work, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, originally published back in 1973. And in that work, Fromm observes that destructiveness is often associated with human aggression. But that's a bit confusing because there are actually two different kinds. So the first type of aggression, which Fromm argues we share with all animals or life forms in general, would be that sort of phylogenetically programmed impulse to attack or to flee when vital interests are being threatened. So he calls this benign aggression, meaning aggression that's, quote, used in the service of the survival of the individual and the species, is biologically adaptive, and ceases when the threat has ceased to exist, end quote. So in that sense, humans, like every other species, must at times use aggression to defend oneself against imminent threats or to their life or their well-being in general, and might even feel compelled at times to destroy that impending threat. The other type Fromm describes as malignant aggression, which refers to destructiveness and cruelty that's, quote, specific to the human species and virtually absent in most mammals, is not phylogenetically programmed and not biologically adaptive. It has no purpose, end quote. That is beyond purely whatever joy that people might feel, perversely obviously, at the suffering of others. So in other words, then why do humans sometimes act with malignant aggression, using their abilities then to destroy or otherwise cause profound damage, harm, and ruin? So, of course, there are obviously gradations of destructiveness. So we can all be harmful or destructive to varying degrees in countless ways, even in our daily pursuits. In our worst moments, though, we're all capable of a certain degree of malignant aggression that involves some element of cruelty or that can cause serious harm. Now, very few people I've ever known personally have transcended completely the possibility then of behaving with some level of malignant aggression. I wish I could say that I have, but I have not. I'm much closer to that goal these days, but I'm still capable of being, in my shorthand way of saying this, capable of being an a-hole. That's my shorthand way of saying partaking in the destructive arts. But here's the thing. I don't know about you, but as soon as I start getting the sense that I'm being an a-hole, to say nothing of actually, acting with malignant aggression, I feel a change in my very being. And I can't continue down that pathway. Virtually impossible. You know what I mean? So it makes me immediately uncomfortable to be hurtful or harmful towards others in any way. So here's a very simple example of what I'm talking about, just from last week. So I was picking up my wife from work at the hospital, and I parked on the side where you're supposed to, and you can stay for up to 10 minutes or whatever. But another person came up, and she pulled up right in the middle of the circle, the roadway, and blocking the circle from anyone else, coming along. And this often happens when somebody wants to pick somebody up right away, right in front of the doors. And that's fine if they come out right away and they're gone within a matter of seconds, right? But this person actually parked there. And that's a bit of a no-no, okay? And so, again, I was parked about 10 feet back in a proper spot, etc. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I noticed that another car had pulled up behind her, and this person, of course, couldn't get through. And in fact, no one could move, again, with the first person, the first woman as it happened to be, blocking the way. And so when this other person pulled up, I gave the, and actually there's another person behind them, I gave the conventional light honk, the courtesy honk, toot, indicating that, she needed to move. And she ignored that, so I honked again. All right. Now, again, you have to understand, she had options. She could have driven forward a bit and then backed in and done some parallel parking behind a small bus that was there. It would have been a little bit of work, but she could have done it. She also could have pulled forward in front of this little small bus into a spot like the one that I was in further back, right? Or she could have done what I've done on many occasions, which is to just then continue to drive around the circle. So again, letting everybody come through, kind of like when you park in front of the airport to pick someone up and they say, please come out. You can't stay here. You have to move. Then you have to drive around, go out and then come back through, right? Well, in this case, she could have done it and it would have taken, 30 seconds to just drive around and then she could have been right back in front. Anyway, she chose none of those options. And so when I honked a third time, she got out of the vehicle and she asked, what the hell my problem was. And I calmly said, well, you're not allowed to park there and block everyone else from driving around the circle. And she screamed, well, I'm picking up my daughter and I can't squeeze in behind that bus. And so I said, and this is actually my error. I wasn't crazy about it, but I said, well, you're just going to block everyone else while you're waiting? That's pretty selfish. End quote. I mean, that's almost a direct quote. And that's kind of how I said it. And so that wasn't the best response on my part, because then she shouted something I didn't fully catch, and she went back to her car. And then her daughter came out, literally like within about another minute after that, and with an attendant. So the daughter was in the wheelchair, but fortunately she could stand up. She was okay. They bring you out of the hospital in a wheelchair. She could stand up, and she was able to walk to her mom's car. But her mom had gotten out to greet her and must have said something about what had happened. And so as the daughter was getting in the car, she turned back and promptly gave me the finger. So not a great situation. And so even though, again, the woman technically was in the wrong, I realized that I too messed up. I realized I had not calmly explained the options that I saw, but I actually just sort of antagonized her by posing the question I did and then telling her that she was being selfish. Now, it may not seem like much, but honestly, it's an example of the last vestiges of me still having what I call the Mikalski a-hole gene. I dropped the whole thing very quickly, but I didn't pursue the aggression or whatever. And I started actually to think about the woman's situation. She was obviously picking up her daughter. That was clear. That was factual. Now, I don't know this for certain, but perhaps she was already in a high state of stress and anxiety, maybe about her daughters, maybe it was a serious health issue. But whatever the case, perhaps the mom was, just simply not thinking clearly under the circumstances. Maybe she was laser focused on her concern for her daughter. But you see how easily then things can escalate. And so even if I were technically correct in asking her to move the vehicle, there are different ways to approach the situation. I could have gotten out of the car without doing the courtesy honk, for example, and just quietly walked up to her and gently explained, what was happening and her options under the circumstances. I could have approached her with more empathy. I could have said, I totally understand your concerns about your daughter's health and you're wanting to pick her up here, but maybe if you could just drive around the circle one time, you'd let everyone else pass, and then you'd be right back in front. There are a lot of things that could have been done. And yet think, on the other hand, how often things get so much worse when people jump to harsh conclusions and start raising their voices and making threatening gestures and ratchet up the emotions to the almost kind of like full-fledged road rage kind of stuff. And often over the most trivial of situations and circumstances. But of course, then you have people out there, how many I don't know, who are actively engaging in destructive behaviors. Not just the everyday stuff like this, brief encounter that I had with the woman and her daughter, but stuff where people are actually trying to actively hurt people on a more regular basis. And so here's a very good example, and this is absolutely true. While I was putting together my notes to do this vlog today, someone apparently hacked my PC, started controlling the cursor from an external site and tried to kind of extort or blackmail me, telling me that I needed to contact them right away, etc. Well, I knew something real was happening because I got 3 or 4 calls shortly thereafter from people asking me if I'd sent them an email with an attachment to open. No, I explained, I'd been hacked. And so there are, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of cyber criminals out there and scammers of various kinds, some working with organized syndicates capable of launching millions of attacks daily, scanning and maliciously looking for vulnerabilities of all kinds in different ways that they might be able to exploit the mostly unknown victims, like myself in this case. So I actually had to shut down my computer. And the first thing I did was I called one of my sons, who's more of an expert on these things than I am. But the attack was actually bad enough and dangerous enough that I had to actually take the computer into a security expert with a local computer company. And they helped out. They were great. They helped me resolve the problem through a number of different steps, disabling certain features, changing passwords, etc. So the whole ordeal ended up taking an hour or so to get fully resolved. And I'm very lucky because there was no real damage done. Then they didn't access my bank accounts, for example, or do anything worse than send out that email with the attachment. I hope no one opened, but who knows. But it's a lot like, again, the phone scammers too, right? They do the same thing. And I think about all the people out there who are doing these things on a daily, on a regular basis. And then I think, really? That's how you want to spend your days? That's what you want to do with your opportunity? Your tremendous chance at life here on Earth? Trying to take advantage of others, trying to rip them off, exploit them? And beyond that, how many people actually work in, different legitimate jobs or businesses, and they're actually sort of trying to do that as well? And then in the extreme, of course, you have all the people who do far more than just property or financial damage. You've got the stalkers, the sexual predators, or those who use all different kinds of violence, forms of violence to hurt and maim or kill others. And it's just all so incredibly destructive. And no, we're not hardwired to be this way. There's only a tiny fraction of people anywhere who are, in some senses, actually hardwired to be completely without empathy and who are capable of routinely then being destructive. For nearly all of the rest of us, it's much more of a choice. And that includes how you and I confront people even in our everyday situations, from the small stuff to the big issues. So 2 final points. First, speaking obviously just for myself, I take absolutely no pleasure in hurting others or destroying the world around me. And I can't even throw a piece of litter on the ground, to say nothing of dumping oil in the river or whatever. It's not to say that I'm not sort of indirectly doing some of these things. I try not to. Nobody's perfect, right? And obviously from the anecdote I shared, I'm not perfect either. But as soon as I sense that I'm hurting someone or causing pain or somehow destroying things around me, I immediately want to stop doing that. I don't want to do that, right? And even if I'm, technically or morally in the right on a specific issue, I don't relish the idea of lording that over someone else and causing them to suffer. So, in other words, even if you're totally in the right, remember that you can still cause great harm and destruction through your own self-righteous rage and anger and so on. And then we'll often compound the problem because we'll figure out a way to justify the harm that we've been causing to others. So we'll say, well, look what they did. They had it coming. They deserve this, and so on. And I get it. Yes, there are times when people do have to be put in jail or confinement of some kind, especially if they're actively threatening or actually harming others. Absolutely. But I'd merely suggest that if we do have to intervene at that level, let's do so professionally and for the greater good, and only to do what's truly necessary to diffuse the situation, to eliminate the immediate threat, and so on. And this leads to my final point, okay? If you're someone who, for whatever reason, actually enjoys being destructive or hurting others, or spends any significant portion of your life engaged in the destructive arts, I'd invite you to seriously reconsider your life purpose or plan. I don't think that's probably any of you watching or listening to this vlog, but maybe, or maybe you know people like that. Again, short of being a psychopath, most of us do have the ability to change our ways. And we have these creative capacities that are so much more rewarding. Some people may not know what their creative abilities are. They may need some extra help to discover or to rediscover their own gifts, but we all have them. It's honestly what motivates me each and every day. I love using my creative gifts to, well, create, don't you? Isn't that so much more rewarding? And it could be in just about any realm. Again, we all have different capacities, different gifts, etc. But think of all the smiles, the goodwill, the positive energy that you generate when you do something that's creative and life-affirming. So if you produce or create or just do something very specific that's life-affirming or directly, for someone else in your life, in your community writ large, people respond almost always in equal measure with positive thoughts and smiles and emotions. And don't most of us see the joy and the happiness that we bring to others and to ourselves when we're engaged in the creative arts that we excel in, or just in using our creative abilities then to enhance the lives of those around us and our environments in general? And so that's where I want to pick up in the next vlog on this matter. All the many ways that we can use our creative potentials, from the smallest of everyday gestures to the big stuff that we sometimes do or that we're committed to. And so nearly every one of us then has made a difference or could be making even more of a difference by using our creativity and ingenuity to better our lives, the lives of those whom we love, care about, and for the world in general. Okay, so until then, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. Peace.